Нет, мы ему говорили Марку найти гарнитуру.
Ну, какие-то я видела наушники там.
Так нормально? Раз. Да. Да? Ты будешь говорить? Окей. А я Марка там буду сказать? Окей. Are we ready? Мы Марка выводим на экран. Good morning, everyone, and I have a great pleasure to welcome you here today. I think we have a great event. In a beautiful summer day, we have a beautiful topic dedicated to, let's say, summer wines of Germany. And we have a very great speaker today with us. This is Mark Алмерт. He was not able to come here directly, but fortunately, due to the great technologies, we almost have him here, close to us. And we have the same wines, so Mark has the same wines with him there. And we'll be able to share the same experience. We are ready to welcome Mark Алмерт, the best world sommelier 2019, and a person with a great experience. And I am myself, Nikolai Cheshinov, who will be together with you for the nearest 2 hours to represent the beautiful German wine selection. So hello, Алмерт, do you hear us? Mark? Do you hear us?
Yes, now I hear you again. Sorry, you were on mute, as things are with Zoom. So maybe did you ask me something? Maybe you can repeat?
No, I just say that we are very happy to welcome you here, and I just quickly introduce you. I said that you are like the best person ever to represent this beautiful selection of German wines, and we're ready to start.
It's very kind, Nikolai. Thank you. Hello to everybody from Zurich. I'm really happy to be here and to share my passion for my home country, my German wines from home with you, although being based in Zurich in Switzerland now, I work with the Bobolac and Bobolac Brown. So if you're ready, I would suggest we start with the presentation.
Okay.
The idea is that we do just a very brief overview of about 30 minutes or half an hour of some of the grapes that are typical for Germany, some of the regions typical for Germany, many things which I'm sure you've heard before, but just to quickly remind you of the key facts, and then move on to some trends like organic, rosé and sparkling, before we finally get to tasting. And we've actually got more than a dozen wines prepared for you, so I hope you had a good breakfast and are able to taste all those wines. So I'll start sharing my screen, and it would be great if Nikolai could just quickly give me feedback if you can see the screen now. It looks like you can. Perfect. Then I suggest we start. Just quickly starting with the facts and figures overview. And just to remind you, in Germany there are now 13 wine-growing regions. Today we will in fact be tasting 9 of them, so almost the entire bunch. And I think it will be very interesting to see the majority of wines coming from slightly warmer regions, but actually still being slightly fresher, slightly more fruit-forward than you might expect some of them to be. Just to remind you, one of the biggest regions, Rheinhessen and Pfalz, together make more than half of the entire wine-growing country, then followed by Baden, Württemberg and Mosel, all of which we'll be tasting today, as well as Franken, Nahe and Rheingau. Then you have some of the smaller regions like Saale and Unstrut, which we won't be tasting today, but like I said, 9 out of 13 will be tasting. And Germany in total has 103,000 hectares roundabout, which is quite small in the wine-growing world, but I'm sure you'll see later that we have a huge variety of wines nonetheless. Just to see what are the plantings like, it's about 2/3 white and 1/3 red. That hasn't really shifted in a long time, so that's a good rule of thumb to remember. 2/3 of all plantings are white and 1/3 red. What are they exactly? Of course, Riesling is the biggest and has always been the biggest in the last couple of decades, and makes up about nearly every 4th bottle of German wine, followed by Müller-Thurgau, which you don't see very often outside of the region and often also used for blending. But then some other high-quality grapes like Grauburgunder, Weißburgunder, Silvaner, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and of course some other things also like Scheurebe and Gewürztraminer, which are a bit more exotic and aromatic. Just to point that out again, the key 5 grapes are Riesling, Müller-Thurgau, Grauburgunder, Weißburgunder, and Silvaner. We'll be tasting all of them today except for Müller-Thurgau, and Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc are 2 common synonyms for Grauburgunder and Weißburgunder if you're in the international market. Red, as we said, there are less red plantings than white plantings, but here Spätburgunder or Pinot Noir, as it's internationally known, really is the key. Almost every 10th bottle of German wine is Spätburgunder, and we'll be tasting some later today. There are also some grapes which are starting to become out of fashion, like Dornfelder, Portugieser, or Trollinger, whereas others like Lemberger, also known as Blaufränkisch, is starting to gain some traction again. Schwarzriesling you might not know as a red wine, but it is Pinot Meunier, so one of the famous champagne grapes. Again, here is a small reminder. The key grapes to look at internationally are Spätburgunder and then Lemberger. In terms of planting, also Dornfelder. I think it's interesting to see the where is red wine in Germany, because we'll be tasting some later, and you see that only Ahr and Württemberg make more red than white. So it's really concentrated to some smaller regions, but of course many of the other regions, even some of the white wine growing regions like Rheingau, also produce lovely Spätburgunders. And something that has now really become a term in the last couple of years is the Pinot Paradise Germany. And by that, we don't only mean Pinot Noir, Spätburgunder, but we also mean Pinot Gris, so Grauburgunder, Pinot Blanc, Weißburgunder, Chardonnay, a little bit of Pinot Meunier, but also St. Laurent or Auxerrois or Frühburgunder, Pinot Précoce, which we'll be tasting later. And to me, is really a hidden gem, a hidden champion of Germany. So I'm really excited that we can show it to you today. As in many countries, the German wine growers are becoming more cautious of nature. So the amount of certified organic vineyard has steadily been increasing. Now you might think 10,000 is not a lot, but there are many more which are currently in the transversion. And that also shows, if you look at the amount of Demeter vineyards, which are actually 12,000 hectares, which is quite a lot. And we'll actually be tasting some organic and biodynamic wine later today together too. If you followed the news, you know that we made our life even more complicated months ago. Yeah, hey. We passed a new German wine law. This happens about every 40, 50 years. The last big wine law was 1971. Small amendments being made along the way. But now we have a new edition to the German wine law from this May. So it's pretty much exactly a month old yesterday, the 8th of May of 2021. And its effects will slowly start gaining traction. Some of them already this May, some will start in a conversion period of 4 to 5 years. There are many smaller changes which you probably won't see. Things like that vineyards can only do a certain amount of plantings with experimental grapes and can only do certain things with sect labeling. But the one key thing is an entire change in philosophy. When you looked into German wine for the first time, you probably learned that German wine law was founded on sugar levels, and that sugar levels were supposed to express the quality. So the Kabinett, the Spätlese, the Auslese, the Beerenauslese, etc. As the entire wine world disagreed, there were also many in Germany disagreeing, especially the GDP, the private organization of about the 200 best wineries in Germany, you could say, and they said this doesn't make sense. The entire world is focusing on a sense of origin, a sense of vineyard site. So why aren't we doing that? So the VDP already started doing its own qualification by village, regional, and Cayenne Grand Cru, similar like in Burgundy. And now many other wineries will have to follow due to the German wine law implementing that and also making sure you can only use certain terms. What does that look like exactly? This is a slightly simplified version of the pyramid that's going to be. The very bottom categories are something you probably won't see internationally, Deutscher Wein and Landwein, because they used to be considered as lower quality categories. Now, Landwein is sometimes used by some of the orange producers. In general, it's something that isn't too popular. Anbaugebiet is something like Rheingau, for example, so the 13 regions we looked at earlier, whereas Region is a key change because it doesn't mean a region like an Anbaugebiet, it means what was formerly known as something like a Großlage, because there were in fact some Großlagen, especially in famous villages like Peaceport, which were called like a single vineyard, but actually were really big and spanned across several villages. So it was quite difficult for the consumer or the sommelier to find out where in that huge area this wine is actually coming from. And to make that more clear on the label now, they would have to label that region. Other, like an Einzellage, where it would just be the name of the vineyard, and they would know that it's a single vineyard site, pretty much like in Burgundy.
Mark?
Yes?
Sorry, we have a small problem with the connection. So can we make a 5-minute stop? And we need to reconnect with you in order to make the sound like in a better way.
Okay.
Okay? 5 minutes, please. We need to reconnect. Так, друзья, мы сейчас хотим немножко исправить ситуацию со звуком. Мы хотим переподключиться. У нас тут возникли сложности небольшие. Сейчас исправим все.
Yes, I was speaking about the regional pyramid of the new German wine law passed 1 month ago in Berlin. Perfect. Can you still see the presentation? Perfect. So I hope you can hear me better now. We were speaking about that the entire idea behind the German wine law was changed from moving from sugar levels and Prädikate to a regional classification, very similar to like you might see it in Burgundy. What does that mean exactly? If you look into this, you see the difference between Altes Recht, which is the old law, and Neues Recht, which is the current law. And you see that on the top part, not much has changed. But like we spoke about, one of the key differences is the so-called Regionalwein, which used to be called something like Iringer Vulkanfelsen. And you might know Iring as being one of the most famous villages in Baden with vineyards or wineries like Heger and Stiegler. And instead of just being able to write Iringer Vulkanfelsen, which looks like it's from a single vineyard, they now are obliged to write Region Vulkanfelsen or Region Vulkanfelsen Iringen if they want to make a big blend of that former Großlager. Everything below that has stayed pretty much the same, especially in the Ortswein level. But for the single vineyards, the Lagenweine, they are now focusing more on the vineyard. So there's a possibility of writing the village smaller, like you see it here with Oberbergner Bassgeige, like you might find it from Fritz Keller, Schwarzer Adler, for example. You see on the right that they need to wait a certain amount until they release it to the market. And soon there will also be the term erstes Gewächs on VDP level, but that's another presentation to come. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I just very quickly want to lead you through the 9 regions we'll be tasting today. And we'll be doing it in alphabetical order. So starting with one of the smallest in general, the R. And as we spoke about, the R is a red wine region. And that's quite interesting because it's actually one of the furthest north. It's close to Bonn. And the R is a tiny, has very schisty soils. And it's actually the most northerly red wine region in the world, and has also the oldest wine growers cooperative in the world, Maishos, from which we have a rosé wine, which we'll be tasting later together. And as we spoke about, it has 82% red wine, with 2/3 being Spätburgunder and then a little bit of Frühburgunder, which we also get to taste. Baden, I'm sure, is much more popular, and you've probably tasted much more from. It's a really interesting region. As you can see here, it was reshaped to make it easier to harvest wine, which was something really popular in the 70s, the Flurbereinigung, which is now not as popular anymore. And it's actually the warmest region, being located right on the border to Alsace in France. It's very warm, although it being very long. You can see here it stretches all the way from the Hessische Bergstraße right down to Basel, to Switzerland. So you can imagine that the different parts of Baden are actually quite different in terms of soils, climate, and grapes. And that's also why the different parts look very different, very picturesque place. It's located on the slopes of the Black Forest. So there's also some great spirits and cake there. But the key thing to remember is it's very versatile in terms of grapes. It has about 60 white, 40% red, but it has 9 very, very different Bereiche. And you see that here on the map a little bit. And the key one is the small one in the middle, which is Kaiserstuhl, the warmest Bereich in all of Germany on volcanic soils, producing some of the most high-quality wines from Baden. But then there's some others like Markgräflerland, more known for Gutedel, or Ortenau, more known for Riesling, whereas the key wines you will find internationally from Baden tend to be both white and red Pinot varietals. Franken, something known as Franconia in English, is famous not only for the beautiful city of Würzburg, which you see here, but also for its odd bottle shape, the Boxbeutel, although you might notice that actually the two wines from Franconia we are tasting today are in regular bottles, so a Riesling and a Burgundy bottle, which is the more modern way to do it nowadays. And being honest, also the one I prefer because it's easy to stack in your wine cellar. It's quite difficult to make a nice stack of Boxbeutel without them sliding out. Franken is the only region based in Bavaria, and it's slightly around Würzburg, but not too far from Frankfurt, which always surprises many people. And of course, is very picturesque, but mainly focuses on Silvaner as their key international grape. Thus, we'll be also tasting to Silvaner. And then there, this is really the home ground of Müller-Thurgau, you could say, although Müller-Thurgau is drunk more locally, especially for aperitif. And here we have white wine with 82% really leading the case. Interesting about Franken is it has very different Bereiche, mein Dreieck, Tauberfranken, and mein Viereck, which is quite important because they have very, very different soils. And today we'll be tasting something from Burgstadt and from Eschendorf, so from two different villages within these interesting Bereiche. Mosel is here the lovely river, which you also see behind me maybe. It's the iconic river for Riesling, I think, in the world, I'd argue. And it's interesting because it's actually a region made out of three rivers, Saar and Ruwer being two tributaries flowing into the Mosel. And it used to be called Mosel-Saar-Ruwer until 2007. So if you have a nice old bottle of Riesling in your cellar, you will still find Mosel-Saar-Ruwer, but now it's only known as Mosel. And as you can see, it's also very north, so it makes sense that it's quite a cool climate region, making slightly crisper mineralic wines. And of course, on schist soils that are very steep, and as you can see on the top right, often have a Roman sundial. And also one of the wines we'll be tasting today is actually called Sonnenuhr, which is the German word for sundial, something the Romans used to implant so the people know when time is to finish work. It also has the steepest vineyard in the world, the Bremer Calmont, and of course is Riesling and white wine based, 62% being Riesling and 91% being white wine. And as you can see, Saar and Ruwer are both located more towards the south of the region, left and right of the city of Trier, then flowing into the Moselle, which then leads on through its different Bereiche until it meanders into the Rhine, close to Koblenz. Nahe, I would strongly suggest you keep a keen eye on. To me, Nahe at the moment is one of the regions with the most homogenic quality levels. There are very many wineries which have made an excellent development. Apart from big names like Dönhoff, there are also many smaller ones which really are using these very magnificent historic soils they have. And although it's only being one of the youngest wine regions, only labeled in 1971 as Nahe, which I think is really fascinating, located right next to Rheinhessen, but much steeper and especially much more varied in terms of soils, as you also see here, where there's a real mix of iron, of schist, of clay, and some modern architecture like Gut Hermannsberg, which you see here with the copper, which will be one of the Sekte we'll be tasting today. And I think this map says it all. It's really the region with the highest diversity of terroirs and soil. It's almost a mosaic like in Burgundy. Pfalz, Palatinate in German, or in English, is the second largest region of Germany. It used to be called Rheinpfalz until not too long ago. Now it's just Pfalz, which I think is more catchy. And it's quite big, also quite warm, also bordering Alsace, but not as warm as Baden. And here you have the famous Weinstraße, which was the first touristic route for wineries and makes excellent wines from several grapes. About a quarter is Riesling, but also another quarter is Pinot grapes. And we'll be tasting some lovely Grauburgunder and Weißburgunder from Pfalz later today. And about 2/3 of it are white. Rheingau, I always have to smile when I see the Rheingau because this was the first place I had my sommelier job. I was working in Wiesbaden, which is the capital city of the Rheingau. And it's probably, together with the Mosel, one of the most iconic Riesling regions in the world, although they do also make excellent Spätburgunder, as we'll be seeing later today, both as Sekt as well as red wine. And of course, many historic things happened here. On the top left, you have Schloss Johannisberg, where the Spätlese or late harvest was founded. Top right, you have Queen Victoria, who used to live here. And bottom right, you have Kloster Eberbach, which will be the first winery we're about to taste, so don't wait too long with pouring. which is really one of the historic wineries in the world. And also important to mention, there's the Geisenheim University, which is the key university for vintners in Germany, and where they learn the more technical approach to winemaking, which now many choose to do more organically. And Rheingau, there's an R in the name, so it's Riesling, 78% Riesling and 12% Spätburgunder, so really focusing on two premium varietals of Germany. And the Spätburgunder are more to the west, mainly close to Assmannshausen, whereas the larger part of the Rheingau is really focusing on Riesling. If you flip the river, you go to Rheinhessen, the largest wine-growing region, often known as the land of the hills, because it's quite easy to make wine there. And actually later on we'll be tasting wine which also has Hügel, so hills, in its name. It's very easy to make wine because you usually don't need to do everything by hand like in the Mosel. It used to be in bad fame due to the bottom left, which is the Liebfrauenkirche in Worms. And you might have heard of Liebfrauenmilch, which has luckily become a thing of the past, this sweet wine. But now they make really exciting dry wines from really famous producers in the Bereiche Bingen, Nierstein and Wonnegau, focusing mainly on white wines with about 72%, but really making a mix of grapes too. Last but not least, we'll be tasting Württemberg, and many people don't think that it's steep, but actually Württemberg has one of the highest percentages of steep vineyards. Everybody only thinks of the Mosel as being steep, but Württemberg is really, really steep too. And like we said, together with the R, it's one of only two regions that makes more red wine than white wine. And it's actually located close to the big car cities, you could say, Stuttgart and Heilbronn. There are many, many rivers there, the key one being the Neckar, but also many smaller ones like Rems, Mur, Tauber, Jagst and Kocher. And it makes, as you can see, a huge mix of wines, Riesling being the leading grape, but then the other reds taking over Trollinger, Lemberger, Schwarzriesling or Pinot Meunier, and Spätburgunder. We're speaking about summer wines, so we need to speak about rosé also, and rosé has become a huge thing, not only internationally, but also in Germany. So more and more wineries are making rosé. It's now more than a 10th of the production, so almost an 1/8. And it's really interesting because it used to be more classic styles like Weißherbst, which was quite antiquated, you could say. But now we see more slightly international styles coming through and often being labeled as rosé or even pink. It's become really something more approachable for younger wine consumers. The trend I personally prefer is Sekt, and this would be the moment for the service team to pour the Sekt if they haven't already, because this is really what wakes me up. I think here it's now 9:30, with you it's 10:30, so I think it's a good time to get into Sekte. And it's important to understand that not every Sekt is a real Sekt. And now what do I mean by that? We have quite a confusing law for sparkling wine. And the top two things I hope you stay away from, it's Perlwein or Schaumwein. I always say it's a soda stream Sekt. So you take a wine and add some carbon dioxide, whereas the bottom part of this page, the Sekt BA, so from a specific Anbaugebiet, a Crémant or a Winzer Sekt, are usually the best ones because they have to be from Germany, from a specified region, and they, especially Crémant and Winzer Sekt, need to be made by the traditional sparkling method, so the champagne method. Whereas something which is just generically labeled Sekt can theoretically also contain grapes from anywhere around Europe as long as it's bottled in Germany. So those tend to be more the supermarket qualities. So really remember to look out for labels like Winzer Sekt, Crémant, and Sekt BA, because those are the high qualities. Just a small anecdote, if you want to geek out, if you're in your restaurant or wine shop, it was actually a mistake that we call it Sekt, because an actor in Berlin came to his favorite pub and ordered Sack, meaning sherry, like in the play of Shakespeare he was putting on at the moment. The waiter misunderstood and brought him a sparkling wine, and this anecdote became so popular that now everyone speaks about Sekt since the 20th century. And we still have a sparkling wine tax, so on every bottle of German Sekt you open anywhere in the world, including Russia, there is 1.02 euros of Sektsteuer